Hi, this is Ralph Schiano. During the weekend of Icon, I got to interview Mark Lenard. Mark is well known to science fiction fans, having played many roles on television, including Urko, the human-hating ape general on the Planet of the Apes television series. He played an ambassador on the Buck Rogers television series, and more recently starred on Otherworld. Perhaps his best-known roles in science fiction, though, are those on Star Trek. During Star Trek's first season, he played the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, one of Star Trek's best episodes. On Star Trek the Motion Picture, he played the captain of the Imperial cruiser Amar, which was destroyed in the first scene of the film. Perhaps his best-loved role, though, is that of Sarek, Spock's father, which he played not only in the second season episode Journey to Babel, but in Star Trek III. Good morning, Mark, and welcome to Destinies.
Good morning.
Well, Mark, why don't you tell us how you first got involved with Star Trek, first of all?
Okay. How did I get involved with Star Trek? That's an interesting question. I came out, I spent most of my acting career in New York. I lived quite a while in New York, although I'm not a native. I'm from Michigan. And I worked in the theater and television and other things there. And for many years, I became known as a kind of classical actor. I did Ibsen and Chekhov and Shaw, Shakespeare, and things of that sort. And I thought, well, it would be interesting to go out to California. Really, one of the things I wanted to do was find a place to live in the country and to play regular guys. Well, you know what happened. You know, I have to play apes and pointed-eared Vulcans and Romulans and Klingons and whatnot. I'm the man, who's been known as the only man who's played all three major aliens. And the rumor was, there might be a fourth or something. Anyway, I came to California. I knew a few people out there, and I read for a role on Star Trek, as a matter of fact, the one with the Horta, that Mark Daniels directed. And he said, he's a good actor, but he's not right for this thing. Thank God I didn't get it, because, in a week or so, I read again, and this was for the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, which was a wonderful role, an interesting kind of show, because it was all shot in sequence, which is something they don't do on films. They shoot, according to location. Time means nothing, You shoot the end at the beginning at the end, and the middle, God knows where. But since it was done on the spaceship, everything was done in sequence. I was in every scene. I was busy. A very good part. And I thought, aside from that, I was making about 4 times what I made, doing the Defenders or something in New York. So I thought, and my wife thought, it's a wonderful place to be. Anyway, that was the beginning. The next year, was a year later, slightly over a year later, they called me and said they had this role. See, I played a Romulan first. The Romulans are kinfolks to the Vulcans. And they had this role as Spock's father. And they called me about 3 weeks before the thing went on, which is very unusual in television. They usually call you the night before and say, whoever is available, they want to play this role. And so I came in, and the director, Joe Pevney, said, well, he looks too young for it, to play Spock's father. And my old friend Fred Phillips, the magical makeup man, said, don't worry, we'll take care of that. So they took care of it adequately, and, I looked a good, vigorous Vulcan 102.4, and that was the beginning. After the show went on, there was a tremendous amount of fan mail. In fact, according to David Gerrold, who was the writer and a kind of Star Trek historian, more mail came for Sarek in the 2-week period after the show went on than for anybody in the show. I didn't know anything about that, of course, until years later. He told me, we were on a plane going to a convention at Michigan State, and he told me about it. I know it's in his book. And I've been kind of identified with Sarek, Spock's father, ever since, among the other things that I've done. And, of course, I've repeated the role, even though I've lived with it all these years. People know me as that, even though I only played it once until Star Trek III, the movie, when I played it again.
What's it like being in an ape costume where the only thing that's recognizable is your voice? How does that feel?
Well, you're recognized by much more than you think. When they called me to do that, I was really very disappointed. They didn't call me to do it. They called me to audition for it. They didn't even offer me the role. And I thought, they want me to play a monkey. And I thought it was a little demeaning. I talked to some people, and they said in the movies they had used people like Morris Evans and classical actors, Shakespearean actors. And what they really wanted, since the main thing that projects is your voice, were people who could do Shakespeare and classical things. You're behind these appliances like a mask. It muffles everything, and you have to be able to project a kind of formal quality. After all, the apes didn't talk like humans. They're not colloquial or anything. It's very formal. And I talked to some people about it, and they thought it was fascinating. And as a matter of fact, when I did the thing, everybody in town wanted to be on the show. And the funny part was not only they wanted to be on it, they wanted to wear the makeup home. So you saw a lot of people around Los Angeles, a lot of apes driving cars, and they wanted to show it to their kids and whatnot. Anyway, I auditioned for it, and there were about 60 people there, of all descriptions, mainly. I played Urko, the chief gorilla, chief of security, and they had to be strong and big. And those that were strong and big, I felt were not such great actors. First of all, I didn't think I had a prayer to get the role. I just didn't feel I was right. Maybe, there's something about me I don't know. And those that I felt were pretty good actors were just not physically right. So I read for it, and I got the part immediately, which was a surprise. And it was a very interesting adaptation. They said, well, forget about eating now. So when you put the stuff on, you can't chew things. It's hard to get them in your mouth anyway, because, the appliance sticks out 3 or 4 inches from the front of your mouth. You have to put everything way back there. You need a long spoon. And when you chew it, the thing will come loose because it's put on with spirit gum. I found that they were wrong. They make appliances. They started a little factory there. They had a little factory right at 20th Century Fox. And different sculptors, men and women, came in and in clay designed the different characters, the chimpanzees, which was Roddy McDowell and several others, and the orangutans, which was Dr. Zayas, and the different gorillas, so that each one was designed to be slightly different and have, an individual character. And then they molded them, and they would turn this stuff out so that I had one, anyway, that was molded to my face. They had to make a cast and everything. And every day that I came to work, I had a new one. It was kind of expensive. But anyway, when the thing fit so well, I found I could do all kinds of things with it. After all, it is really a piece of rubber, and it has no life unless you bring it life, your eyes, and you have to make faces like apes do, and that kind of makes the thing come alive. And your eyes are very important. People who saw me on the show recognized my voice. They said they recognized my eyes, and they recognized me. I thought at first, I'm playing an ape, and I told you I was a little bit insulted by it, just slightly. And afterwards, I kind of took it as a character role, really, with certain gorilla-like qualities, but he was a kind of a lusty, sort of hardy, not completely, a sort of devious fellow, but in a kind of innocent way, full of good humor. It was a very dynamic role and became, really, what they said was the most dynamic role on the show. And if it had gone on, they were planning all kinds of great things for it. And it was kind of a horror. It was very difficult. There was the heat under this makeup all day long. Putting on the makeup took 3 hours. We used to come in at 5 in the morning to start with it. And we did a lot of the shooting out in Malibu Canyon at the Fox Ranch. And since it was out of doors and it's in the canyon, you had to stop when the light goes, when the sun goes down. And winter was coming on. This was November. And the sun was going down earlier and earlier. So instead of starting at 5 with the makeup, they wanted to start at 4. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, the show didn't go on. We did about 14 segments. It really didn't have the backing of CBS. It was a wonderful idea, and it's a pity that it just was thrown away and went down the drain. The movies had great ratings, and the television show was put on Friday night opposite the toughest competition there was at that time, which was Chico and the Man and Sanford and Son, and they would get 50% shares, and we would get 28, 25, which would be fine nowadays. But then they expected more, and I think the head of CBS wasn't for the show. But if it had been very successful, they would have continued it. So it is a pity. ABC at the time talked about picking the show up, but they don't like to do that. They don't like to take the chance. Other networks don't like to take the show from a different network because they put themselves out on a limb, and if the show fails, they really look awful. If it succeeds, then, they look like magicians, but if it fails, they look bad, and they're not willing to take the chance. So that good idea was thrown away. There were several of the segments that I thought were very good that investigated the history and the culture of the apes and the juxtaposition. Well, you know what science fiction is. The strength of science fiction is that you can make so many comments about life and all the cultures without getting yourself in trouble, And one took place in the destroyed San Francisco subway, where Urkel, the gorilla, begins to discover something about his past. And that was one of my favorites.
At the end of part 1 of the interview, we were talking about Mark's role as Urko on the Planet of the Apes television series. Mark pointed out that after only 14 episodes, CBS decided to cancel Planet of the Apes. It seems that the networks don't give a series a chance to succeed. If they had a few more episodes or the beginning of another season, do you think much would have been different?
Well, yes, sure. I think it was originally scheduled for Tuesday evening, and as the executive producer, Herb Hirschman, said, sometime after that, if it had been on then, it would have been running still. It has great fascination for all audiences. What they needed was a few more of the adults. They had a lot of kids. And it needs somebody behind it. Some shows have had that. Look at Hill Street Blues and Archie Bunker, All in the Family. It was terrible for numbers for the first, I think, even 2 years. But they had faith in it, and they kept it on. There was somebody behind it, and, became an enormous success. And Hill Street Blues, for years. And now it's one of the consistently top-rated shows. And it always got good reception, good reviews, and Planet of the Apes did too. They just reviewed the opening shows, but got good reaction, and it would have improved. It would have gotten better. But it just wasn't enough for it. Enough people weren't for it in power at the networks. It's a very political thing, too. Sometimes, if you come in with a new series, the program director of the studio or of the network is kind of responsible for the show. And sometimes, as in the case of another series that I was in, Here Come the Brides, in the middle of that show, they got a new program director. And the new one really wants to bring his own shows in, So you've got to deal with that, too. Sometimes, if it is somebody's pet show. I was in another series, also science fiction. This was called Cliffhangers. It was 3 segments, pattern after the old serials, Saturday afternoon serials. That's before your time, anyway. It's sort of before mine, really, but everybody used to go on Saturday afternoon and see the serials. And these were little shorts that ran along with the regular movie. And they always ended as a cliffhanger, somebody at the edge of a cliff falling into space or something, and the next time you saw it, you found out how they were saved. Anyway, these were 3 of these put together in 1 hour. One was about a vampire, it was about Dracula, and one was with Susan Anton. It was about a girl photographer. And the one that I was in was about the Underground Kingdom, or something like that. And I played Thorvald, who was the emperor of the Underground Kingdom, or the king of the Underground Empire. I'm not sure, one or the other. Anyway, it was patterned after an old Gene Autry movie, I think. It was a Western up above, and down below, underground, in the Underground Empire, it was science fiction. And these night riders, or whatever they were, my men went out during the day and created havoc. and then they would come down to the underground world. Up above it was in black and white, and down below it was in color. When they put it on, Fred Silverman, who was kind of the golden boy of ABC, and he had formed his own production company, and he wanted this show. He loved this show. So everybody said, well, it has a good chance of staying on. There were certain problems built in with it because every segment was about 17 minutes long, and it was very hard to create a story and create interest in the characters in that short space of time. So it didn't do too well, but people thought since this powerful man was behind it, they would get a good chance. Well, it wasn't enough. Even with his influence, it didn't stay on. So you need a combination of things. Somebody who really likes a show and will support it, like they did with Hill Street Blues. The network, despite the fact that it got such terrible ratings, I think none of their shows were getting good ratings at the time anyway, so they had nothing else to put in its place, and at least this was a good show and got great critical response, so they decided to stay with it. And sure enough, in time, shifting it around, getting the proper spot for it, if the show is good, it'll find its audience. But they're just not willing to do that very often, That's the exception rather than what usually happens.
Well, we all know what happened to Star Trek. The network seemed to be against that from the very beginning, and there were campaigns to keep it on in the second and third seasons.
Oh, yeah. Well, they did keep it on. I was at Paramount. I think I was doing a Mission Impossible, and people from the data processing there were coming around with petitions. Save Star Trek. I said, you don't think you're going to be able to do it? Well, sure enough, they did. And they put it on a third season. They put it on at a time which was predetermined to kill it, but they kept it on anyway because of the fans. And it's historic in the history of television that science fiction does do well as far as ratings go. Star Trek, as you know, didn't do very well. It wasn't until it went into syndication. And people loved it. But you see, then it was shown at 6 o'clock. People came home from work. I've had people tell me, women, men, I come home, open a bottle of beer, take my shoes off, put my feet up on the coffee table and watch Star Trek. Well, it was on at all hours. A lot of kids that never saw it before saw it. I know that I was on a series. My daughters were very small then. They never got to see it because they went to bed before it came on. It wasn't until it got into syndication. Well, of course, in syndication, I think Star Trek is probably the most popular show ever. It's never been off. It plays everywhere. And in some areas, it's on 4 times a day. People get it. They've told me 4 times a day. They get it from across the river and here and there and whatnot. But it's never been off the air since it started in 1966. I don't know if it ever will be. Those segments hold up. Maybe someday they'll make a new series,
Well, maybe it'll go off the air, but they're selling video cassettes, and I know they're starting with Laserdisc.
Yeah, well, that might drive them off the air, if enough people get that sort of thing. But the ratings are still good wherever it's shown.
But I think Star Trek will always be a good market. It seems to have a staying power that very few things do have.
I've puzzled about that, and I've asked. I've been in England at conventions like yours here, and I used to ask everybody. I never got really a satisfactory answer. Why Star Trek rather than some of these other shows? There have been many science fiction shows. In fact, one was just on a few years ago, and I saw about it. It was sort of a comedy science fiction. I think Richard Benjamin was in it.
Quark, yeah.
Yeah, you remember that? Anyway, that show went on, and they had a part of it of an alien, ficus. It was supposed to be a tree, some part vegetable or something. And I saw about it, and I'm dark, and a little too much like Dick Benjamin, I think. They wanted a blonde for it. And he said at the time, I thought it was kind of cute, the idea of a funny science fiction thing. And he said science fiction has never really succeeded, and sure enough, that one didn't either.
That was very funny.
Was it?
It was a shame that went off. It seems that a show like Star Trek, even though the Nielsen's weren't that hot, they've found out now that the audience they appeal to is a more intelligent audience that has the buying power. So I think they've rethought that now.
Well, now there are all kinds of science fiction, but they still haven't succeeded. There's V, and there's Otherworld, the show that I was on, and I was supposed to have a recurring role in it. I think that's off now. It still has problems. I think they discovered in syndication that it had a much larger audience than they thought. They thought it was a bunch of fanatics, a small group that were very vocal and wanted it badly, but they found that most people like it. It's one of its strengths, Star Trek at least. It has a kind of very universal appeal. It appeals to a wide range of people. They're good stories, good characters, and it's no longer kind of silly to like it, First they thought, these people are ridiculous, the Trekkies dressing up in the costumes and all that, and all this fanaticism about them. But so many people have been exposed to it and like it, and it's become part of American mythology. We've become part of the mythology of America.
Well, I think good science fiction doesn't rely too much on the hardware. It's about people. And Star Trek had many memorable characters, and they were very human stories. And I might add that two of the best-liked episodes are the ones that you were in, Balance of Terror and Journey to Babel, are classic episodes.
Yeah.
They're prototypes. That's the way the movies should proceed in a fashion like those.
Yes, I agree they were good stories. I enjoyed doing them, too. And I was fortunate that I had good scripts. I could have done one of those other ones. God knows what would have come of it anyway. So you have to be a little bit lucky, too. It's true, the relationship of the characters and the development of the characters and the relationship between... It evolved. It was a bit different at first between Spock and the rest. You notice in the early shows he always addresses him as Mr. Spock and so forth. It's never Spock. Bones was Dr. McCoy rather than Bones, and that relationship, the kind of little sort of humorous byplay between Spock and McCoy developed later on. All these little things came out of the characters, the people that played them, and the writers writing for them. And their kind of characteristics, their qualities developed too.
But they did progress, so it was believable. You saw them coming together and gradually becoming friendlier and friendlier, and that was nice.
Yeah, oh sure, and it should. And that happens a lot in series. The producers and the writers will write for the actors who play the parts after a while. And they discover there are certain qualities that they have and certain things they do better. And these characters evolve in the course of the series and become something quite different. They become really the strength of the actor. I found when I did Planet of the Apes, they began looking for stories where Urkel could be a sort of lusty kind of two-faced fellow, but with, certain redeeming characteristics. And I enjoyed it. I played it, as I said, as a kind of character role. To me, it was... It just happened to be an ape, but it was a character part. And have a lot of freedom to do what you might not do ordinarily, as an actor when you're playing something like this. And it's great fun.
Well, you've done many science fiction roles. Do you have any fear of being typecast? How do you feel about that?
I don't have any fear of it. I'm willing to work in whatever they want me to do, I think in certain areas they think of me now, particularly since the movies have come on, as a kind of science fiction actor. Science fiction is Hollywood's version of the classics. I'm still a kind of classical actor, even though I've played westerns, thugs. I played all kinds of characters. When I first came out, they were doing all kinds of shows with European characters, Mission Impossible and others. And I played a French hairdresser. I played all kinds of continental spies. I played South American dictators, a one-eyed South American dictator. I played colonels, a Japanese ninja before it was popular to be. That was on Hawaii Five-0, before anybody knew what a ninja was. It's a while ago. I played a Hawaiian thug, Russian chief of Secret Service, all of these things. But Star Trek has been on all these years. And those segments play, people come up to me. Years ago, when I came to New York and go into the theater, people would come up to me and say, I saw your segments on Star Trek 39 times. I said, an infrequent viewer, and they've played hundreds of times, and so I've been in front of the audience in that role for a long time. Plus the fact the movies have been very popular, and since Sarah came back in the last movie, it's sort of reinforcement. I'm hoping to make New York my headquarters at least part of the time and see if I can work in the theater again and maybe change some of those things. People see you suddenly as the kind of role that you play, and if you're a success and do very well in one particular kind of role, that's the way they want to cast you. So really, in order to change that mold, you've got to get another type of role.
Well, is there anything on the horizon, any plans in the works at the moment?
Well, I think I told you. First of all, I was supposed to do a series with Gene Roddenberry, a new series, and I don't know what's happened to that. It was ready to go at one time, and then they lost the backing. It was going to be syndicated, and then it was turned over to ABC or one of the networks. And that's possible, but I'm not holding my breath. And I was to have a recurring role on Otherworld. I'm not sure that's going to continue. I'm always open to pilots, and I do a little television now and then. I'm hopeful to get back into the theater here in New York, and that's what I'm here for. I have some things that people want me to do, but I'd like to see what the new season is like and see if I can get a Broadway show and do other things.
Well, I'm sorry to say we're almost out of time. I might mention that we're taping this during the Icon 4 convention, and how are you enjoying the convention? How have things gone for you this year?
Very much. I like conventions, and this one is a delightful one because it's run by the fans, and that's fun, too. And there are all kinds of guests here from, writers and artists and whatnot, and it's nice to be in that kind of company. It's an unusual experience for an actor to be able to meet his audience and talk to them and get feedback from them, and it's charming out here in Stony Brook. I like it. After living so long in California, it's nice to get back to the East, and I'm enjoying it very much.
Well, I'm afraid that's about all the time we have. We're going to whisk Mark off right onto stage now.
That's true.
Well, thanks a lot for talking to us, Mark.
Yeah,
and
sure.
We hope to have you back at another Icon at some future date.
I'd love to. Thank you.
For Destinies, this is Ralph Schiano.